Okay, so now that we have this this input going on, let's go ahead and just add back a couple things. So we're gonna say input left click like that. Um, we are going to say, what was it? Grid X int grid Y, right? We're gonna say what pixel position to grid position. This is mouse position dot x, mouse position dot y, grid x, grid y. Then we are going to say grid position to pixel position, grid x, grid y, player position dot x, player position dot y, right? Oh yeah, because it's not left. You know, I'm calling it mouse left. I just want to call it left click. Well, actually, no, there's a reason not to do that. So we don't want to have left click and left release, right? We would just like to say that we have mouse left. And if we're storing it where we're storing the pressed keys and we're storing it where we press the released keys, then we would get a different output, right? So I think mouse left is better, even though I keep making that mistake. Let's see. We want these to be pointers. All right, so now we are clicking and moving around wonderfully. Okay, what I want to do now is go ahead and start drawing the things that the player is typing, right? So here we have these key codes, right? And we're using these key codes to look up the key on the keyboard, right? And we have to create this mapping between, okay, what did they press, and like what is the key code and what does that translate to in ASCII? Because we can see, when you press A, it doesn't say 68, right? Which is kind of annoying. So what we want to do is use this function. I'm going to say else right here. So if it's not escape or it's not an arrow key, we want to go ahead and treat it like a symbol. Now, we are going to create this thing called keySym. And then we're going to make an array, and I'm going to call it just string, and there's going to be two things in it, right? And we're going to call this function called xLookupString, which is going to take the event, the x key, right? It's going to take the string, it's going to take 1, and it's also going to take keySym and then null. And I can go ahead and right here, if we do man x lookup string, we see we get this thing right here, which, let's see, where's the description? So yeah, it looks up. So essentially, this has the mapping from the key code to the character, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to write that into our string array, our string buffer. We want to know how many bytes it is. So we're just going to say, all right, it's only 1 byte. Then we're going to say what the key symbol is that it's going to write into. And then the last thing is the X compose status. We don't care about the compose status right now. So I'm going to just say that, oops, I keep typing the wrong thing right here. So we're going to say that string of 1 is going to equal 0. Remember that these functions are, we just want to terminate it with 0, right? So if we wanted to like print the string, right, we want to make sure that, hey, we have two things. The first one's going to be the character, and then the next one is going to be 0, so that way we can print it, right? Well, now we have this, and what we want to do is add it to a list of characters that have been typed, right? So pretty much what we want to do is say we do like a push input char, right? And we'll do input q. And then we are going to pass in the symbol, right? Which is going to be the first thing. And what I actually want to do is say we're only going to do that if the string is, let me pull up my ASCII table right here. So we're only going to do that if the string is greater than or equal to 65, and the string is less than or equal to 90, right? Although really, I don't actually think we care about capitals. Let's just do this with 97 and 122, right? So we're going to say, all right, hey, only if it's a lowercase letter are we going to add it. So here, let's go into our input queue and add a new thing. And this is just going to be input chars, right? Q.input chars equals char star of malloc q dot size, right? Maybe we want to use a different size for our input chars. Right now, though, we certainly don't care. And now I can do this thing called void push input char. Q enum, or not enum here, char c, right? Or I say q input chars of q char count, so I forgot to make a variable up there, is going to be equal to c, and say uint32 char count, right? And we're going to want to say the same thing here where we say char count equals 0. I'll go ahead and bundle that right there so they're just next to each other. So now we have our input queue keeping track of two types of input. We have this input which is like keys or buttons that are like doing gameplay commands, right? And now we just want to have this thing that's getting like, oh, hey, did you type a letter? Well, what was that letter, right? And I want to go ahead and say we're going to make a thing called here, and we're going to call this player letter, right? I'm going to just say it equals 0 at the start, and we're going to say if input q char count is greater than 0, we're going to say input char equals input q input chars of 0, right? And then we are going to print that right here. We can just say input char, right? And say if input char does not equal 0, right? or really we want to say if input char is greater than or equal to 32, right? Because we're ignoring all of these things right here. So let's go ahead and check that out. Oops. What did I do wrong here? Oh, because it's not, it's just dot. So this might be something we want to make a function for, but I don't know exactly what that function would look like yet. So, I could go ahead and do the usage code first. Yeah, I called it player letter, not input char. So player letter, and then right here we're going to do player letter, right? Let's see, what is this? Player letter, right? And I called it key capital S, not key lowercase s. Okay. So now we aren't drawing anything. We can still click around. But if I type A or... Oh, yeah, okay, I see what the problem is. We aren't clearing our letter. Are we? So let's go ahead and say where is it? Yeah, part of clearing the input queue is going to be q char count equals 0 and q, or do memset char count. Oh, and I realized, yeah, here we have a problem because our size is the size of the enum, which is, 4 bytes integers. So I want to say q.char size is just going to be 32, right? And then q.char size like that. So we have 32 bytes right there. So it's kind of looking like maybe this is its own separate queue because it's nearly identical, right? Oops, I called that. All right, let's see. Because this is input chars, right? All right. So now when we go ahead and do that, I can type A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I forgot to type G. Doing that, and we are changing the letter, which is super awesome. Now, we aren't really placing it where we want to, and that's because we aren't really storing the position of our player in the grid very nicely. So I think that's the thing I want to do next. In the next video, we're going to store the grid position of the player, and then when you type a letter, we're going to look one grid position to the right, And I think that will start to look a lot nicer.